Welcome to Dropping Pebbles in the Pond. And tech willing, we're live on a variety of different platforms. So wherever you're watching, and whether you're watching live or watching the recorded replay, in which case, #replay, welcome to the show. As usual, I invite you to grab a brew or your favorite tipple, depending on what time it is in your part of the world. And I suggest you get a notebook and pen, because not only do I have a few questions for you to reflect on, so you can then share your thoughts with us, I also have another very special guest joining me a little later on. So you'll probably want to make some notes. Then all that's left to do is settle in, make yourself comfortable for the next 45 minutes or so. And for your information, it's easier for us to see your comments in real time so we can interact with you in a proper conversational way if you're watching on YouTube. So maybe head over there so that we can get into more of a real-time conversation. Now, I'm always interested to know where you're joining from, so do let us know which part of the world you're currently in, or as my dear friend Mary Alice Arthur says, where your feet currently hit the ground. Let's see how many continents we're connecting with today. As ever, I'm being supported, or more properly held together behind the scenes by my brilliant team, and they'll share comments and questions as they become relevant, because I forget to look for those. So my team will be responsible for helping me keep up to date with the comments and questions. Now, the title of this episode: Leadership Intentions Misunderstood. As introverts, we often think we're doing the right things, showing up in the right way, being ourselves, aligned with our own values and preferences. But often it's misunderstood by other people. Us just being ourselves somehow isn't quite what others expect. As someone who's worked in the leadership development space for the last 30 plus years, it's still quite a shock for me to say that. I have the utmost respect for most of my fellow coaches, trainers, and facilitators. I say most because I have met some with very dubious credentials, if that's not a contradiction of terms. But I first met my guest today when we were both speaking at the Women in Financial Advisory Services back in 2019, before the world went crazy. I was impressed on that day and remain impressed, as we have similar views on many things leadership, and she contributes wonderful thought leadership pieces that I catch on LinkedIn. She also happens to be an introvert, and the best example of how being an introvert needn't rule anyone out from making a big difference in their chosen field. Before I say any more, I think we've got some location comments, so let's see where people are joining us from. Story Stitching Studs. Oh, you've done it again in terms of getting the tongue twister in there early. Thank you, Brad. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate that. High Tech Mother, thank you for joining from Asia. And yes, it's probably well into the early hours for you, so don't stay up too late. Sue Caravans Renovations, woke up just for you ladies in northern southwest Australia. Thank you, Sue. Really appreciate that. Sebastian, always joining from a different planet, and today it's Jupiter. So yeah, we've got people from a few places, and I'm sure there'll be more commenting fairly soon. So I said that I'd say a little bit more about my guest. So she is a shining example of how being an introvert doesn't mean that we have to hide behind a rock, and we can make a big difference. And my guest today is a leadership psychologist and a behavioral scientist, so I better be on my best behavior, don't you think? She's the founder of The Success Architect and works with organizations and leaders to build high trust, highly effective teams in high stakes environments. So I'm pleased to say that this evening, our conversation is not something that I would class as a high stakes environment, but I think it is going to be a very insightful environment. I'm thrilled that she's agreed to be our guest on Dropping Pebbles in the Pond today. And I know that she'll share so much value and help make sense of so much for our audiences. So without further ado, please help me to welcome to the stage Julie Goddard.
Hello, Jo. Welcome.
Hi.
Pleasure to be here.
It's such a joy to have you here. Obviously, I've given a brief intro, but I would love for you to share just a little bit about your journey as a success architect before we dive into our big questions for the night. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Who am I? That's a big, deep question. Let's start with my career past. So I started in education. I worked for a number of years, moving up the leadership ladder in education, eventually working across authorities, looking at leadership standards. And I worked at Ofsted for a while before setting up my own company. I think I met somebody at dinner once, Jo, and he was talking about what a marvellous time he was having with a company that he was working and about the work that he was doing. And I thought to myself, that's what I do now, only I'm working a 72-hour week. And he was selling a very nice story about what it was like to be a business psychologist. So I requalified. I did another master's degree. It's not impressive, and I must stop collecting them. It was hugely addictive and the wrong sort of self-validation that I've come to since realise. But so I've worked across sectors, as you said, in high stakes environments. And what that means for me is people are making constant decisions about things that really matter. So education in the care sector, financial services, things where the pressure is acute. And when there's a lot of pressure, our actions get distorted along the way. Other than that, I live in Birmingham, so quite close to all the motorway networks. I love it. I've got 2 Labradors that I know you adore when I share their pictures with over on social media. They keep me really busy. I'm partial to an odd bit of white chocolate and a very nice glass of Malbec, and I have to say I've got one waiting for me later.
I thoroughly approve, Julie. I thoroughly approve. August is here with us as well. Stumbles, falls, gets up. It's okay. Brad was here before you, August, so we know you're here. Story stitching Studge, which is, see, look, tongue twister every time. I'm actually looking forward to this episode, given I just got promoted to vice president in my organization's digital responsibility division. Brad, huge congratulations and well deserved. So you're going to be one of those people who knows what it's like to be in a high pressure, high stakes environment. But what I also know about Brad, and you may not know this, Julie, is he is super, super organized. So if anyone's got control over this, it'll be Brad. So yeah, he's good. He's good like that.
Good to know.
Yeah. Anyway, that this show is about enabling introverts to flourish in all areas of their life. And one of the things that I found myself commenting on quite a lot in your thought leadership pieces is this piece around trust, because I know that introverts are often perceived incorrectly in a way, and our best intentions are often misread. So I'd love your take on what specifically you'd recommend for those of us who kind of need time to build trust, time to think before we talk, that all of those things that might be misunderstood by people. So what would you recommend, Julie?
I think if we start with what trust is, the answer is in that little nugget, really. And at i3 Leadership, we have a definition of trust where all of our actions and words, everything that goes into the melting pot of interaction between 2 people, they all add up. And the other person is watching you as the leader. And really, they want to hear 3 things. They want to hear that you'll turn up with clarity. They want to hear that you won't disappear when things get hard. And they want to know that they can count on you. So there are those three elements of trust, and they're really looking at how integrity works. So when pressure gets really dialed up and ramped up, certain traits that we have as introverts are misinterpreted. And that becomes even more intense when there's a great deal of uncertainty. And we were talking in the green room before we started, Joe, about how much uncertainty there was in the world at the moment. So whether or not you work in a high stakes environment, people are more aware and sensitive about that right now. And I think one of the things is, as you were saying about being an introvert, is you take extra reflection time and you pause before you speak. And what's happening is other people are seeing that in action. And we all, as humans, we tell ourselves a story about why that's happening. So we see the tip of the iceberg, if you like, of people's behavior, and then we make up the whole foundation very quickly. And we're often very unkind towards other people. I won't get into specific biases and things like that today, Joe. Let's make it really practical. Other people are watching us and they're not on the same channel that we're on. That's another way of looking at it. We're all stuck on our own channel, and so are they. So they're walking around, and that they really want to hear, is what you're going to do safe to me? That's a big message. So things like pausing and taking reflection time away can be misread as they're not being open.
Yeah.
No, there's an agenda behind there that isn't going to go my way. It hasn't got my best interests at heart. So that's when trust can start getting a little bit edgy, when we're not transparent about how we operate and our communication preferences. So not everybody thinks quickly. Not everybody is allowed his voice in the meeting room at the time. And thank goodness for that, actually, that we're all so different. But knowing that now, that empowers us to make choices about how we act and sharing certain things with us and being transparent about that. So I think it's okay to say, I'm just going to pause, or I'm really going to give that some time because I think it needs a bit more deep thinking. And when you're open about it, you take away that power of the storyteller in the other person. So you're actually sharing with them what's going on beneath the iceberg, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And we'd not talked obviously about that, but often what I refer to that as is a kind of pre-frame or a placeholder, or actually sharing my process out loud. Because you're right, as introverts, we typically have a different process in that we think before we speak. And in that silence, you're right, because as humans, we're meaning-making machines, we have to make up that story to make sense of it. And the story is normally negative in some way against us. So if we help people understand what we're doing when we're quiet, you're right. And I love the way you put it, kind of takes away the power of their storytelling or their ability to make up a story. So I think that's absolutely fabulous. And I think that's similar to what you would refer to as one of your authentic adjustments, isn't it, that we can make?
Yeah, because what happens in that gap between what we mean, what our intentions are, and the story, we have to sort of make a slight adjustment. But it's not about changing who we are. That would be an awful world to live in, where we had to, and we've all gone into performance appraisals and things like that, Joe, and been told you need to be more confident, you need to be more outspoken, lots of eye rolling amongst your listeners, I'm sure, and a few heads in hands even at this junction. But in that moment, we need to make a slight adjustment because one is needed. Otherwise, that person is going to go away. They are going to tell themselves a story, and they're going to assume the worst about us. And once that happens, it's a bit like placing a rotten apple in a box with other apples, and you'll get to break time and somebody will be at the water cooler, or, we'll be chatting after the Zoom meeting, all of those. And it only takes one person to say something like, have you noticed how Julie isn't really talking to us as much as she used to? Because when things are unclear, that sort of narrative, because one of the things that we can do is withdraw into ourselves, because we're processing a lot of information. There's a lot of things happening. And we value depth of conversation more than shallow conversations with lots of different people. But if you're not one of those people that I'm having that in-depth conversation with, what's the story you're telling yourself about me?
Yeah.
Am I stuck up? Am I, am I arrogant? There's all sorts of different scenarios that we could pick for why I've acted in that way. So that's adjustment. Sorry,
yeah. No, you're so right. And what I was thinking was how easy it is for us to get wound up and frustrated about that, but not necessarily do anything to shift the perception, to kind of unpack the story, to help people understand. It's almost like, I've worked with a lot of people who say, but they should know. Well, we're not mind readers. The communication needs to happen both ways. I can't expect someone to just take me on face value or trust what I'm doing if I'm not prepared to share that when I'm quiet, this is what's happening for me. Yeah. I think we've got another couple of comments, and then we'll pick that one up again. Yeah. Difference is what makes it beautiful. Yeah. I find a bit of communication about how I operate by an introvert and a bit of patience from the extrovert can go a long way. Well said. Well said. And that's from the partnership where there's an extrovert and an introvert, and they've worked out how to do that beautifully.
There is a flip side, isn't there, Jo? And that is that if you're the extrovert, holding back is difficult for you.
Yeah.
And so you need to own that and say to people, just in case there's a few extroverts out there watching because they're working with a team of introverts, you need to just be as transparent as we're saying. You need to own your own authentic adjustments, which is if you leap in one too many times, you need to actually say, I'm sorry, I've just realized I'm doing that again, aren't I?
Yeah.
I'll just ask for everybody's thoughts.
That bit of vulnerability goes a long, long way from both sides, actually. Yeah. August saying perfectly said, Julie. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, couldn't agree more. You started to talk about kind of when things start to go wrong. And I'd be interested to move on to just explore a bit about what the indications are that trust has been broken, or that it's getting onto slightly kind of dodgy ground, or our intentions have been misunderstood. So what are the key things that we should be looking for, Julie?
Firstly, people stop saying what they really think. And it sounds really obvious, but you'll notice that there's been a shift in the conversation or the communication pattern. And that's usually a signal, an early signal that something has shifted. So you get people agreeing a lot more, or they're not challenging or pushing back, or that hesitancy where you wouldn't see it, or just an echo chamber starts developing.
Right.
Secondly, you might find people guessing at what's been communicated rather than actually what you've said. So it becomes like, well, I know she said this, but actually at morning briefing, when she said that, what she really meant was this. Because you get a lot of ambiguity creeping in because people are trying to guess a lot more. You get people withdrawing in lots of small ways, really subtle. So you might notice that somebody makes less eye contact with you, particularly over important issues. Or you might get some people that hold your gaze a lot more. It depends on their confidence. Yeah, exactly like that. With us, energy tends to change before language does. So I tend to a read of the room and sort of, how does a meeting normally feel, or how does my team normally feel when we approach this task? And when I'm new in post, I'll probably get at the front of I use a remarkable, but whatever you use to keep your notes in, I just give it a mark out of 10. On average, where are my team normally, energy wise? You can in that and look at certain individuals within your team, but you'll notice that energy really drops. And our trigger can be you realizing that you're having to pick up that gap in the energy. So you're having to do more work for the team, which as an introvert is relatively exhausting because you're trying to galvanize the team and also get the communication going. That can really, really take a lot from you.
And I'm guessing that if it's an extroverted leader, for instance, they're going to step into that all too quickly and feel like, well, it's down to me then, and just kind of crack on and do the work of the team, which actually only serves to alienate and exclude people and maybe close them down even more. So that's a big warning signal in a way for the extroverted leaders who may have the introverts in their team.
I think it's always worth knowing what your stress signature is, and it's worth reflecting on that. What do I do when the pressure is turned up? Do I speed up? Do I slow down? Who do I talk to? Who do I avoid? That's an interesting one, because the people that we're avoiding, there's often a lesson to be found in there, and therefore the growth's there. I always find that really interesting. But yeah, spend time with that. What goes first when I'm under pressure that I need to protect? What do I start prioritizing?
I love that term, stress signature, and it's kind of started me thinking about what my stress signature is actually. And I guess for me, it's also going to depend on the degree of psychological safety I feel as to whether it feels safe for me to make my stress signature visible or known to others.
I think we tend to see vulnerability as weak, and the instinct is, when we're looking at trust, is to put our armor on, to use a Brene Brown saying, put our armor on and close ourselves off. But actually the opposite is sometimes needed, and a bit of bravery is sometimes needed for us to share, not everything, but to share some things can be very powerful, and we can choose what they are. We can say something as simple as, I don't have all the answers I'd like to, and I can't share them with you. I have a lot of things that I'm thinking through right now. I'm happy to share my thought process right now, but it's not the end. It's not a finished product. And obviously the scripts that we discuss, you take a spark of what feels authentic for you and just own that. But I think people trust other people that come across as more human. And it's the most human thing in the world to go, I don't know. I don't know the answers to everything. That's why I've got a team surrounding me of phenomenal people. And the worst thing we can do is make them so fearful, and to expand on the psychological safety point you made, Jo, to make them close down out of fear. And we lose that potential. We, and the team is worth more than the sum of its parts. When it's working really, really well, you get an excellent synergy. So being aware of those things can be helpful, and not shying away from being vulnerable, because it's actually the most incredible leadership strength when we get it right.
I agree. And I think we're going to go on to talk a little bit more about that in the moment. But I remember, I think it was Amy Edmondson who talked about situational humility and how important that is in leadership. And yet how many leaders feel awkward in that situation because they feel the pressure that they ought to know everything, especially the inexperienced leaders. I think the more the likes of you and I work with those leaders and they realize actually they don't have to have the answer to everything, the easier it becomes for them. But until that point, it's almost like they're armoring up, but in a different way, in order that, to think that they've got the answers to everything.
Jo, sorry, do you want to do the comment?
Yeah, let's do that. And then Dramaniac, silence is not disrespect or disconnection, not when the person is contributing, just differently or maybe slower than others, gentler than others. Parker, thank you so much. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. Absolutely right. But it takes somebody, for me, with a degree of emotional intelligence as well, to, we're talking about a lot of different things in a way tonight, aren't we? But to actually recognize that people are going to show up in different ways, and that not to jump straight into the story, but to be curious rather than jump into their own story making, I guess. I interrupted you.
Curiosity, in terms of building trust, in terms of so many things, curiosity is key.
Yeah.
I heard over coffee this last week somebody say this phrase, and I've got it on a post-it note on the side of my desk, and it's be curious, not furious.
Oh, that's nice.
And
That's nice.
It stops that cognitive leap into the storytelling.
Yeah.
You told yourself a story at that point. You're angry at somebody for some invented reason or possibility or action that they probably haven't done. But if you get curious, if you start asking questions, if you help me to understand is a really good sentence to have up your sleeve for when you're having those one-to-ones with people that you just don't get.
And what a difference. So, a slight change of word for someone to say, I don't understand, doesn't invite any kind of curiosity, but to say, help me understand, all of a sudden what we've opened the door is, I want to know what's going on for you. So yeah, again, a lovely phrase, help me understand. Nice. So we're edging towards that territory then of thinking about this whole confidence piece, because I mentioned that maybe the inexperienced leaders are those who find the situational humility difficult, who would find it hard to be able to say, I don't know, we've never done this before, or I'm not sure what the answer is. So can we just start to explore that kind of how necessary the kind of unshakable confidence is for a leader? Because I don't believe in it, and I don't think you do either.
No, I don't. I hate it. I hate it more than anything. If anyone's read any of my stuff over on LinkedIn, my thought leadership articles or newsletters, I think it's the most damaging thing for us currently in how we view leadership at the moment, is that you have to feel confident. And I think for women in particular, there is a multi-billion-dollar industry geared towards telling us we need to be more confident. It's everywhere. It's prevalent. There's coaches. You don't go a day without soaking that up. And it's the wrong sort of confidence. I think we've really gone away from the original meaning of confidence, which does involve courage. And the root word for courage, the Latin root word for courage, is heart, is core. We have to find that.
Courage,
And so it's often seen as certainty, confidence, and something that we have to have in order to move forward. And actually, that's not how confidence works at all. Confidence works in summoning courage up within ourselves to have enough self-trust to take the next step. And in a way, you go, I'm betting on myself. I know that whatever comes my way, whatever is thrown at me, we were live, so I had to adjust my language then, Joe. Whatever's thrown at me, I can handle that. I trust my skill set to be able to do that. And the first time and that's why I talk about summoned courage rather than just courage. It's not something natural. It's something we really, every one of us has to work at. And then confidence will follow. Because we then get into a place where we think, actually, and that's a very deep confidence. But if we wait to feel certain, if we wait to feel confident about everything, then we're lost as leaders, because particularly in this environment and the pressure pot that globally we're under at the moment, there is never certainty. You can start to take a course of action and overthink it and then say to yourself, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then that reinforces that whole narrative we've got going on about imposter syndrome and all of the things that I'm 100% allergic to. They make sense to us, Joe. They really do make sense to us. And we like putting ourselves in boxes. But actually, it's quite damaging. We all have moments of self-doubt, every single one of us. And at certain times, in certain contexts, we have more doubt than at others. But if we can look around our team, if we can look around our resources, what we have available to us, and go, I'm going to commit to this decision now. And then all my energy is going to make sure that that decision is the right one. I'm going to make that decision right rather than looking to make the right decision. And that emphasis just changes everything. It frees us up from hindsight, I should have done that. And we look with pink tinted glasses at choices that we turn down. If we make a choice and we then put all our energy into making that choice right, we get our team behind it, we get our resources behind it, we lean into it, that's a real energy building, refreshing view to have that alleviates that stress.
Yeah. And I've just seen a comment pop up from August, actually, about loving the reframe. And yeah, there it is. Yeah, love the reframe twist. Absolutely. And also Brad saying, if I may, leadership isn't just confidence, though, is it? No, it's not. It's about other skills we bring to the table. No, you're not wrong at all. And to pick up on what Julie was saying, and that courage, the from the heart. And for a long time, I've talked about the fact that we need courage in order to feel confident. So again, you and I are on the same page there, in that it's the courage that comes first. And I've long talked about Dr. Rob Jung's definition of confidence. And he talks about it as being the ability to take action in spite of how challenging it feels. And that's the bit about, I have trust in myself to be able to deal with this, even when I feel a bit sick, even when my knees are shaking and my voice is quivering. Actually, if I can still get into action rather than run away and hide, that's what confidence is.
Yeah.
And for me, that's something that works as well, in terms of it is about, it's not about, for me, confidence is not about never feeling scared. Of course, I'm going to feel scared sometimes. Of course, I'm going to have self-doubt sometimes. But that isn't what confidence is. And I think your reframe has been beautiful there, Julie. So thank you.
Just the more we can do to make ourselves human in our leadership, the quicker we can build trust. I just looked over the top of my computer because I was like, I need to know where this thinking comes from. Really great book called Thinking in Bets by a lady called Annie Duke. And one of the things I took away from that, for me personally, was when I have a big decision, I then always say how confident I am about it afterwards. So you get, I'm 85% confident that this will work, or we're 60% confident that this will work. But if we look at the other option, we're only a 40% there. But what that does is it normalizes not being 100% confident before decisions are made, and also it allows you to gather other resources around you at the same time.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I want to add to that, and I don't think it's a divergence from what you're talking about, is that if we put all our energies in, this is the reframe you used, if we put all our energies into making our decision right rather than making the right decision, that doesn't mean that we don't reflect and learn from what we did in order to do things differently or make different decisions. But what we're not doing is procrastinating and beating ourselves up for what we didn't do or what we could have done. We're still taking action, learning in the process, and moving forward. And I think we're in agreement on that. Even so, I don't think it's a divergent, is it?
No, it absolutely is that. It's about being gentle and compassionate towards ourselves and not just towards other people. We're at works in progress the whole way through. This is a first draft. I always have this language when I first meet a team. Let's talk about first drafts. Let's talk about work in progress. Let's open up how we prefer to work, because we're all differently. And the minute, whatever tool it is that enables you to realize, gosh, we all operate incredibly differently, is such a powerful moment. And I know you've spoken about that in the past, Jo. I3, we talk about three main drives in what we call our motivational coding. So it's more a fluid way of looking at how we respond and how our behavior works. But one of those core things is, am I fixed mindset or am I growth mindset? And that's, we haven't got time to unpack that now, but the key to building trust is it will go wrong. You know, sometimes we'll say things, and despite our best intentions, somebody else will still jump to that story or still believe that story. And you just have to hold that faith and hold that belief and step with it, knowing you're doing the right thing, and you're growing, and the team is growing. And when growth mindset sounds very sexy, everybody wants to have growth mindset, but actually it's hard. It's out of your comfort zone. You've got to open up yourself to the possibility that for a little while, if you do something new, you won't be as good at it. And for some people, that's a real challenge. So yeah, we've unpacked a lot there. So going back to your how important is confidence. Confidence is important. You will grow it. Be gentle with yourself. Don't be frightened to make some mistakes along the way. If you do make those mistakes, treat it as you said, Jo, you know, do a post-mortem on it, get everybody together, draw out the learning from it, because that's how you build cultures of growth rather than the old toxic workplaces that we used to see, where there was one leader who was dropped in as a heroic leader, you know, and he or she was going to solve everything all on their own. Thank you very much. We're humans, and we need, and I think that's the crux of it. As introverts, we need other people, but sometimes they can be a bit overwhelming, and we can think, well, why on earth don't they just get it? I've told them. You said earlier on in your conversation, I told them once. They should know that. And the thing is, if you think about the number of times that people have to tell you something, it's really quite, because we're on our own channel. So our heads are full of so much that people just don't remember things. They need to come across it time and time again. And it's our responsibility to keep gently nudging and reminding people and having that transparency about how we work and the value that we bring as introverts.
Yeah. And again, I think we could do a whole new show about that, in terms of people really owning their strengths and owning their value, and not somehow complying with the narrative that we're less than, or we're broken and need fixing and need to be something else, because none of that is true. Both of us know that.
Rebel against that as much with every fibre, and however that rebellion looks for you, then don't own that. We're all on a journey. We're all starting from different points. We bring different strengths to the table. And isn't the world, I think, we're sort of looping back to, so I think it was Sebastian's point earlier on, that the world is a beautiful place because it is diverse, because we have so many different perspectives. And that's what enables us to be creative. And that's when you get the high performance into your team, is when your team feels safe enough to get creative.
And know that their difference is valued. Spot on. I think we probably ought to, as I say, we could carry on for a long time, but we probably ought to get to today's pebble, I think. And of course, for today's pebble, of course, it's going to be about what it is in a way that we need to do, because both Julie and I are on the same page here. So today's pebble is this: we may be introverts, but if we don't want to be misunderstood or continue to be misunderstood, we have to take some responsibility for helping people understand us. Julie's just kind of ended with that bit, really. And someone once said to me, it's incredibly arrogant of you, Jo, to think that you say things once and people remember it, because as Julie said, we've got so much going on and we're in our own channels. So of course we may feel frustrated, but not taking action is only going to deepen our annoyance and our potential exclusion. So back to Julie's point, in a way, don't get furious, get curious. So if the pebble, Julie, is about everyone taking responsibility for helping other people understand us, what's your take on that?
I think it's very interesting. And I think what I would say was, don't let authenticity be your get out of jail card free.
Oh,
Because the negative side of being authentic is that it stops you growing. I'm just being who I am. This is me being authentic. And you have to understand this about me. And you hear that language coming through, you have to understand. And it's very, this is who I am. It's very closed off, very shut language.
yeah.
And we're here to genuinely, what is life about if it isn't about growth? I'm not coming at it from a spiritual point. How sad would we be as human beings if we never changed and never grew? And I can remember my mother, God bless her soul, saying about my dad, he'd upset me. And she said, Julie, you can't expect him to change at this point in his life. And she genuinely meant that, Jo. But what's scary is my dad was younger than I am now when she said that to me. And if I thought I was never going to change, I can go to a restaurant and I can pick a new dish to try, thinking I won't like it, but it could become my new favorite thing. And then that's authentic for me. So I know I'm giving a metaphor out of a leadership context here, but we cannot sit back, wash our hands of our own responsibility for growth. Agreed. If we want to be the sort of leader that other people choose to follow, that lives true to our own values, the first step is take responsibility for our growth and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I know that's a cliche, but that will mean something different for us as introverts as it will to somebody who's an extrovert. But as we've seen through our conversation here today, Jo, it's transparency and openness and that willing to grow that's the way forward for everyone.
Yeah. And to pick up on your point about the kind of fixed mindset, what a fixed mindset of your, well, I don't know if it was your dad's mindset or your mum's mindset about your dad, in that he is who he is, you can't expect him to change. That's a classic example of a fixed mindset. And you're right.
Well, Jo, such bless them. They did their best, but very, very fixed mindset household. And I think that's taught me a lot. But because but as you said, everything's a growth, isn't it? If you stop, you challenge yourself.
And I've always said that I'm such a lifelong learner. I can't imagine not growing and developing and understanding more about myself and the world. And I imagine I'll do that until I turn my toes up. That's my intention anyway.
Well, Jo, when I'm not doing this, I'm a Ned and I'm a vice chair. I spend a lot of time in the care sector, and the people that have the longest, happiest lives are those people that are still open to new experience or revisiting old experiences, but taking that risk. There's a lovely story the other day about a lady that was 101 years old, and she used to horse ride, and they took her horse riding with the Disabled Horse Riding Society. And that energy, that growth for life stays with us. And I think leadership it's a little microcosm really of what bigger picture for us all is about.
Yeah.
Step one, and I think it really is the trust with yourself. Sorry, Jo.
No, I was just going to say there was a comment that came up about, that comment about we can change at 99. We're always changing. Absolutely right. We can change at 101. We can still grow. So the question I want to leave everyone with, based on what we've both said about we need to take responsibility and not use authenticity as a get out of jail card free, get out of jail free card. And, I am who I am. What is it that each of us needs to do in order to reduce the likelihood of our natural behaviors and tendencies being misunderstood? Because let's face it, complaining without positive action leads us nowhere. Now, Julie has been very generous, and she's created a fabulous free downloadable called Quiet Power Visible Trust, and it's available to all of the audience members. Quick disclaimer, because you'll be giving Julie your email address for the downloadable, just from GDPR perspective, we just need to mention that you'll be on Julie's list. The QR code is top right above Julie's head, so you can see it there. And I just want to give Julie a chance to talk a little bit about that, and also to say how they can find you, Julie, because I imagine people will want to know more. Certainly follow Julie on LinkedIn, but how can they find out more and work with you, Julie?
If you as Joe's just said, if you scan that QR code, that will take you to my website. And my mainstay for my thought leadership is either my website or LinkedIn. The resource that I've created for Joe following our conversations, because I felt inspired, Joe, preparing for this, is 10 of the reasons and things, behavioral patterns really, that we might have as introverts that could be misinterpreted, along with the authentic adjustment and why that might be useful and powerful for you to use. So it's one pager, 10 really useful things for you to take away. And as I've said with Joe in the conversation, make sure it's authentically you. Don't feel you have to read it off the sheet, use it to inspire you. But hopefully out of those 10, you'll get to one. The number 9, Joe, when I was looking at it earlier about listening and about the power that we bring as a listener, as an introvert, but how we can frame that in the workplace so people see the value for it.
Yeah, I have a really quick story around that, which is that hasn't happened for a long time, but people used to say to me, "God, you're so quiet, aren't you?" And in the past, I would have mumbled some kind of an apology. And over the last decade or so, I've learned to say something like, "Thank you for noticing. One of my strengths as an introvert is that I'm a really good listener, and I listen with my eyes as well as my ears. And I can do that best when I'm quiet. So thank you for noticing." And that just takes the sting out of probably what was meant as a bit of a criticism. And I've had people kind of look back at me a bit kind of fish mouth, opening, closing mouth, not really knowing what to say. Because when we own those strengths and learn to articulate them positively, we start to shift the story that people are making up about us.
It's that quiet power.
Absolutely. Well, listen, that brings us to the close of today's show. We're just coming up to 10 minutes to the hour. And Julie and I have obviously riffed and could have gone on for much longer, but around how we as quieter souls risk being misunderstood if we don't make those authentic adjustments, if we don't take time to help people understand what makes us tick. And as with so much that I explore in this show, it's about the choices we now make and the narrative we live by. So before we close, I'm just going to check with the team to see if there are any other questions or comments that we need to pick up on. And we'll just wait for that for a moment. If not, then yeah, I think we're good. So remember, and I think, again, Julie and I have said this in our own ways today, we're all work in progress. And long may our flourishing journeys continue. Long may we continue to learn and grow and stretch our comfort zones. Last word to you, Julie.
Always. Just what Joe said. I just feel like this. Carry on growing. Stay true to yourself, but beware. Don't let that be your get out of jail card.
Fabulous. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to close down for time now. And remember, if you are watching on replay, #replay, we'll still pick up and respond to your comments. And my final thanks to Julie. This has been a brilliant show, and I suspect we're going to invite you back, Julie. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and have a good rest of your evening, night, day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you all.